got my start by volunteering at a museum. It used to be called the Mesa Southwest Museum in Arizona, but now it's called the Arizona Museum of Natural History. And I started volunteering in that program in the late 90s. I wasn't obsessed with dinosaurs as a kid, but past life was really interesting to me. I wanted to know what happened before I was there. And with paleontology, we know so much has happened before, hundreds of millions of years. So I got my start thinking about where fossils come from. Being from Arizona was very lucky for me because much of the state looks a lot like this. There's lots of deserts. And where there's lots of deserts, there are lots of rock. And sometimes within those rocks, there are lots of fossils. This is me just a few years ago in Petrified Forest National Park, which is located in northern Arizona. I've done research out there since 2002, and every year except last year and the year before when our research was canceled because of safety concerns. We've done work studying what the environment and what kind of animals were present when dinosaurs showed up in North America. So most people know this area because of the big fossilized trees. They're magnificent. They're all kinds of different colors. But among those trees, you have some of the oldest dinosaurs from North America. So what I am thinking about while I'm in the field is what kind of places did our earliest dinosaurs evolve in? What kind of anatomy did they have? It turns out most of these early dinosaurs and their close relatives were small. They were much smaller than most of the dinosaurs that you see in museums today. They would have still been pretty intimidating, even though they might be 2 to 3 feet at the hip. Most of them were carnivorous. But back in 2002, 2003, when I started thinking about early dinosaurs in North America, we really didn't have that many species from this time period. Most of the early dinosaurs that we had and their close relatives were from different places. So I wanted to find out more about what happened during the origin of dinosaurs in North America. We all know these early dinosaurs are in contrast with their later dinosaurs. And I can definitely say that there is something absolutely special about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs were ridiculously successful on our planet, and we can measure this in many different ways. One, the obvious one by looking at this picture, is body size. They were the biggest vertebrates that have ever been on land. Not only do you get body size from this, but you get a diversity of forms. Dinosaurs were lots and lots of different forms, and these forms sometimes are repeated by other reptiles, but most of the time they are not repeated by any living animal. This group is also super successful because they've been on our planet since about 230 million years ago. Some of the big ones went extinct 65 million years ago, of course. But if you include birds in this, dinosaurs are still the most diverse group of vertebrates that live on land today. So I don't study these big dinosaurs. Most of the dinosaurs I study are a lot smaller. Honestly, it's a lot easier to get them out of the ground and get them cleaned when they're not ridiculously big. So those are the animals that I concentrate on, some of the older ones. But I have a number of outstanding questions that I'll be pursuing for my entire career. And students that work with me are also interested in these questions. Specifically, it's very difficult to say what is a dinosaur when all of its close relatives are extinct. We can point to a few features today, but there aren't many. One of the features that I always like to show students or anybody that I talk with what makes a dinosaur unique is that they have an open hip socket, or what we call a hole in the acetabulum, and that's where the upper leg fits in. And luckily, That characteristic still stands up as a character that is present in the oldest dinosaurs, but not their closest relatives, all the way up to birds today. So that is one of the most obvious characters that all dinosaurs share. But there aren't many others once you start looking at their closest relative. And before the 2000s, we didn't actually have that much information on the closest relatives of dinosaurs. We didn't know what they looked like, how big they were, very little about their biology. But we knew that when dinosaurs showed up in the fossil record, they kind of take over the planet. Maybe not so much in the Triassic period, the first of three major periods that dinosaurs were dominant, but by the Jurassic, they were pretty much the giants that we see in museums, and they were all across our planet. So these are two leading questions that have really pushed my fieldwork and research over the last 15 years. And like I said, will continue to for a very long time. But let's put dinosaurs, especially the oldest dinosaurs, into the context that I like to think about them in. First of all, let's talk about their relationships. Now, it's really weird to think about, but crocodiles and birds are each other's closest living relatives. Crocodiles today have only a few species, where birds have more than 10,000, depending on the week. Not everyone agrees how many species there are, but about 10,000 is a good number. In the past, there were a lot more crocodilian species, especially when this group, Archosauria, that includes birds and crocodiles, split into these two major lineages. I won't be talking about the Pseudotsuchia today or the crocodilian relatives, but I wanted to talk about birds and dinosaurs and their closest relatives. And that entire group is what we call the Aviometatarsalia, or essentially the bird feet. So this includes everything closer to a bird and a dinosaur than any living crocodilian. So now that we're all on the same page for how these animals are related, I wanted to go back in time a little bit to when I started thinking about early dinosaurs. And we have lots of specimens from around the world. Eoraptor is a pretty complete specimen that's from Argentina that was found in the early 1990s. We have sauropodomorphs. These are the early relatives of the gigantic long-necked dinosaurs that we see prominent in so many museums across our planet. And then you have the first big group of carnivorous dinosaurs called Herrerasaurus. Herrerasaurus is known from most of a complete skeleton, but we still don't understand a lot about its biology. But this was a pretty good fossil record. None of these animals are from North America, though. What we do have from North America was one massive death assemblage of this animal called Coelophysis. It hasn't shown up in any Jurassic Park movies quite yet. We'll see what we see in the future, but this was one of the most famous finds of Triassic dinosaurs, because it was found as a massive graveyard of Triassic dinosaurs in New Mexico in the 1940s. The preparation on these are very slow, but we know a lot about Coelophysis. And it turns out that most of the North American early dinosaurs all looked a lot like Coelophysis. They weren't very big, maybe 2 to 3 meters in length. They were probably only 1.5 to 2 feet high at the hip, and they were all little carnivores. So that's kind of what we had in the early 2000s in terms of Triassic dinosaurs. In terms of the relatives of dinosaurs, we only had a few specimens, and there were 3 species in 2002. One of those was named Lag-Erpiton, and you don't see a nice skeleton, largely because this is all of what we had. Just a leg, a hip, and some vertebrae. And we had this other animal called Marsuchus, which was a lot more complete, but much smaller than Lagarpaton, and we're still missing a lot of the skull. So these two animals share a number of dinosaur-like characters, but because they were largely incomplete, we didn't know exactly what they were telling us about the origin of dinosaurs and what dinosaur cousins look like, what their paleobiology was. So this is where I started thinking, all right, if we're going to figure out what a dinosaur is, let's look at their closest relatives. Let's go find some more fossils. Knowing that dinosaurs evolved in the Triassic, we had a couple constraints. So we had to look in Triassic rocks, and I will love the Triassic to death for as long as I live, because I think it is one of the most important periods in Earth history, especially for reptile evolution. But to set the stage, we know that the Triassic began with pretty much the worst time on our planet. At the end of the Permian, upwards of 95% of all life would extinct. After that extinction, reptiles really get their chance to take over the planet. Not just dinosaurs, but an entire group of reptiles. At the end of the Triassic, you had another extinction. Many of those dinosaur relatives went extinct then, and dinosaurs are the survivors. So I knew if I wanted to find early dinosaur relatives, I had to look in the Triassic. We also know quite a bit about what the planet looked like at the time. The planet looked like a Pac-Man. It was Pangea. You could walk from the northern part of near the North Pole to almost the South Pole without crossing an ocean. Even though you didn't cross an ocean, you might cross some very hot and arid places, as you can see here in the middle of these continents that are red. And we think that those temperatures were really hot in the middle. So knowing that these early dinosaurs and their closest relatives could get anywhere, that told me that these early relatives and dinosaurs could be anywhere on our planet. And that's what I actually did. I set out to look for the right kind of rocks of the right age. So some kind of sedimentary rock that probably previously preserved fossil vertebrates. And I was extremely fortunate to either set up fieldwork myself or be asked to go on fieldwork or find the right people to help me conduct field work all over the planet. I did a lot of work in the Western US, as you can see up in here, even in Nova Scotia. And the closest old dinosaurs to most of us in Virginia now aren't that far away. They're in some basins that opened up when Africa and North America pulled away from each other. Down here, there are some very famous sites in Argentina that have early dinosaurs like Herrerasaurus and those dinosaurian close relatives. Places in Africa have old dinosaurs, but no dinosaur relatives. And the same goes for places like Mongolia, which are very famous for young dinosaurs, but not so much for the oldest dinosaurs and their closest relatives. So I had many places to go, and what I wanted to talk about specifically today is Africa, because Africa seems to be the key to understanding a lot of early dinosaur evolution. And that takes us back to understanding what was happening in North America a few million years later. So when I started fieldwork, as I mentioned before, I grew up in the Western US, where rocks and places you find fossils look like this. Wide open, big sky country with lots of rocks, very few plants, and lots of fossils when you find a pocket of fossils. So this is what I was used to. And the first time I went to Africa, this is what I thought it would be like. I was a second year graduate student. I was asked to accompany a large international team to go to Tanzania. So this is the picture I had in my mind in 2007, what parts of Africa would look like where we would find fossils. What we saw when we got there was a little bit different. largely because, well, one, none of us had been to that area before, but two, we all had our preconceived notions of what those fossil beds would look like. Instead of wide open spaces with a little bit of plant, this is what it looked like. There was grass everywhere. And as a paleontologist, grass hides fossils very well. And it's funny because this grass here was called buffalo or elephant grass, largely because it could hide buffalo or elephants. Luckily, they weren't there in this particular area, but they are around those areas. So this was a challenge. But you know what? After going through these tall fields of grass, when we found rock, we found lots of fossils. This is what these sites look like from the middle Triassic of Tanzania. This is a typical shot of paleontologists in the field where you can't see any of our faces because we're all down looking at the ground. But even though this doesn't look like the Western US, what we had here were some amazing fossils. This is a skull that was found exactly in this spot of a relative of mammals. And this over here was the first reptile skull that was found in this part of Tanzania ever. And this was our first day in the field, which was spectacular. And even though this animal right here is not a dinosaur relative, it still is one of those animals that tells us a lot about early dinosaur evolution because this animal lived with those early dinosaur relatives. All right. So we spent the first field season in 2007 a little bit blind, walking around through grass, looking for fossils. And a lot of it was just luck when we found a clearing and we found a little bit of rock. We got smarter, and Google gave us the gift of higher resolution satellite footage. And I love showing this image right here. Not only did we have satellite footage of this area, but it was actually very high in resolution. This right here, if you can see my cursor, this path right here is actually a footpath. And when we first went out to Africa, we walked on this path back and forth about 7 days looking for fossils. What we didn't see because of tall grass was this entire eroded area over here. So using Google Earth, our second year out there, we were able to use GPS and walk out to this area, which has lots of exposed rock, and found lots and lots of fossils. So we use a little bit of technology while we're out there, but a lot of what we do is just walk around and hopefully find rock, and within those rocks, find fossils. Tanzania is definitely a special place where you find lots of fossils in those rocks. So stepping back for just a second, I want to say we're in Tanzania, and there are other places in Africa that we've worked in a very similar kind of environment. We've worked in some national parks in Zambia looking for similar kinds of animals. And I want to tell you that when you're out there looking for fossils, you're almost never alone, and it always seems like something is watching, which for me is a little bit mind-blowing, not because of safety, but understanding the world around us and then what we're thinking about with taking the world back hundreds of millions of years to a very different time. But I wanted to show a couple pictures because you always have something around you. Most of the time, it's very safe. These hippos, luckily, are always in the water, and most fossils that we have are pretty far away from water. But you just get to see amazing aspects of the fauna. So not only am I thinking in the past, but I'm trying to understand how the land has changed over millions and millions of years to give us the diversity that we have today. So I just wanted to show a couple pictures that I took while we were out looking for fossils, especially of birds. Given that they're living dinosaurs, it's always fun to think that we're looking for their distant ancestors. And I became a birder after my first year in Africa because everything was strange and new to me. Not only do we have birds, but we've got other reptiles that are all around, amphibians, including crocodiles, and frogs visit us all the time at our field sites, and little lizards are pretty common at our field sites, but once in a while we see some of these bigger monitor lizards. So that's always a lot of fun. And then, of course, the group that dominates the land today, like dinosaurs did really 65 million years ago, are the mammals. And these are all pictures pretty close to some of our sites. And again, these are pictures I took, so we got pretty close to some of the wildlife, not intentionally, but we just happened to be close when we were in their space. That was kind of context of what it's like when we're in the field. Now I wanted to take you to a specific part of Tanzania called the Ruhuhu Basin. The Ruhuhu Basin is in a part of southern Tanzania that doesn't get visited by many people. Most of the tourism in Tanzania takes place up here in the northern part of the country, but down here, it's the right kind of rocks. These are the rocks that we're interested in looking at. And these rocks specifically crossed that incredibly bad time on Earth when the Permian ended with some major disaster. There was lots of extinction. We have a pretty good idea that it was volcanoes. But then we get rocks on top that record the recovery of our planet and the diversification of reptiles, including dinosaur close relatives. But more than dinosaurs and their close relatives, we find a variety of animals that lived with those early dinosaur relatives, including Disinodonts, which are more closely related to you and I because they're mammal relatives that were dominant in the Permian and Triassic, giant-headed amphibians, which kind of look like toilet seats. They had really flat heads and they were about the size of toilet seats. We've got closer relatives to us as mammals called cynodonts, as I showed you. And you can see that their teeth are differentiated, just like we have incisors, a canine, and post-canines. And then we have early archosaurs. So these are the relatives of crocodiles and birds. And once in a while, we got really lucky with some of these early archosaurs and found almost complete skeletons. So I wanted to show you this image here, which is exactly how we found this specimen in 2012. I looked down and saw a couple fragments and saw this little jawbone. And I told everyone, back up, because we have to collect this systematically so we get every little scrap, because clearly it had mostly fallen out of the rock. So this image, it was taken just a few moments after the discovery. This was a really exciting discovery because it was most of the skeleton of this animal. And in the field that night, we started putting it together. This was a shot in 2012 where me on the left and my partner, Michelle Stalker, who is also a vertebrate paleontologist, spread out all the fragments and started putting this animal together the day we found it. And after about a year of cleaning back at Virginia Tech and other places, we came up with a skeleton like this. This wasn't an early dinosaur relative. It's closer to crocodiles, but it told us that early dinosaur relative skeletons were possible to find in this area. And just a few days later, we did find those skeletons. We had found bits of this animal previously. This is the day of the discovery. And if you look down at the picture at the bottom, this is what those bones look like. They're not perfect bones. They're covered up in a little bit of rock. And they're among all these blades of grass. And it was kind of funny because one of my colleagues, Ken and Jilzik, who is pictured here in the front, found one bone in this area, showed it to me, and I saw a feature that all dinosaurs share with their closest relatives, but no other reptiles. And at first, he thought it was a rib, but when I saw this feature, we knew we had something special. When we looked down, we noticed there were bones all over around our feet. And that really got us thinking, all right, this is the place to be to find dinosaur close relatives, dinosaur cousins. And just a few years later, we found another specimen. A colleague of mine named Roger Smith, who is probably one of the best people in the world to find fossils, found this specimen. And like that other specimen, we started putting it together. What you're looking at in this picture are the two upper leg bones of an early dinosaur relative. And behind it, we have lots and lots of bits of the skeleton. So this was amazing because it was just one skeleton of a dinosaur relative that is exceptionally well preserved. And when after preparation, a couple of years later, we put it together, and this is what we had: a Coelosaurus congwe, which was one of the oldest dinosaur relatives ever found up to that point. And this was one of the more complete skeletons ever found. We had a beautiful set of almost complete legs, arms, and this little pile right here was the skull. And with this, we've been able to understand that dinosaur relatives were just as diverse as dinosaurs were when they show up a few million years later. Not only do we see that, but we see clues to dinosaurian characteristics that showed up in their cousins before dinosaurs even appear. One of those is a feature on the femur, the upper leg bone. The femur in this particular animal has lots of different muscle scars. And with those muscle scars, we can understand how muscles either were similar to other animals or changed. And we all know that chickens and other birds have different kinds of legs than any other reptile. So here is a chicken leg. Most of you have seen this. Maybe you haven't seen it for a while with all its different components. But this chicken leg is very different from a lizard or a crocodile. What you see is the muscle mass is much closer to the top of the bone than the bottom of the bone. A lizard or a crocodile has a more even distribution of muscles on its leg bones. So what you see are the muscles moving up, and because those muscles still have to control parts of the feet, which have been removed in these chicken legs, they're extended down through tendons. Now, the movement of these muscles up the leg leave different kinds of muscle scars. So it turns out that chicken-like legs evolved before even dinosaurs are around in their closest relatives. So that's just one example of what we're learning from these dinosaur relatives. So a Coelosaurus was an awesome discovery because it started to tell us more about what happened just before dinosaurs showed up in the fossil record. But we knew in this area in Tanzania that we had older rocks in the area, and very few fossils had been found in that area. So that got us thinking, let's go down deeper in time and look in these older rocks. So in 2015, we got that chance and we started looking around. Honestly, we didn't find much for the first couple days, but that same colleague, Roger Smith, who's very good at finding fossils, walked away and we didn't see him for a while. We all sat down. We're eating a granola bar because when we don't find fossils, we eat granola bars. And we're all of a sudden realized Roger was gone. And when Roger's gone, it's usually a good thing because it means he found something. And we hear a tiny little voice from over the hill saying, "I found a bone bed. I found a bone bed." It got louder and louder. And we came over and he found one of the most important sites from this age anywhere in the world. This is what it looked like just minutes after discovering that area. Here's all team members looking down in this little crevice, and you can't see bones, but they're all over the surface here. Not only did we find bones in the surface, but we traced them back to where they were sticking out of the rock. We started digging. Almost always we find the bones on the surface, then we start digging. And in this area, we found lots of bones sticking out, including this lump right here between me, I'm wrapped around it, and Michelle, her back. We are framing an entire skull of an animal that's not a dinosaur, but a relative of mammals, one of those Disinodonts. But we saw in this bone bed a variety of different kinds of fossils, including a long-necked reptile, one of those toilet-headed amphibians. This is actually that skull that was between Michelle and I. Now that it's been cleaned, it's a Disinodont. And curiously, another long-necked reptile. And I recognized parts of the morphology of these bones as being a potential dinosaur relative, but I had seen these bones in another place before. I had seen them on one of my trips to London. Back in the 1930s, a group from London and Cambridge went to this area and discovered these vertebrae and some limb bones, but no one had known what this animal was. But now we had new specimens. And combining what had been found in London with what we found in 2015, we were able to put together this composite of quite a complete animal. And we now even have more of this animal because we went back in 2017 and found more of the skeleton. We were able to name this animal Teleocrater based on the original name that the person in London wanted to call it. And what we saw were many, many different features of dinosaurs, but they were extremely subtle. And if you saw this animal, you wouldn't think it was a dinosaur. You'd think maybe a big kind of lizard-like animal. But those features told us that this was the first step towards a dinosaur and a bird than we had ever seen, rather than a crocodile-like morphology. When we put it all together, we got this great reconstruction. So what you're looking at here is one of the oldest relatives of dinosaurs that have ever been found. And it just hints at how the dinosaur body evolved from its closest relatives to the earliest dinosaurs to the giants we see in the Jurassic. So we have this long record of dinosaurs and their closest relatives, and it turns out they were living together for quite a long time. When true dinosaurs appear, some of these animals were still around, but none of these dinosaur cousins make it out of the Triassic. So in almost all these places in Tanzania and Zambia and places we've looked in East and kind of South Central Africa, we hadn't found true dinosaurs, just their cousins. But if we go to the south just a little bit further, or to the north of Africa, we have true dinosaurs. So if we look at this, we've got an area that has dinosaur relatives and true dinosaurs. South Africa has been known for true dinosaurs from the Triassic for a very long time. But there's no intermediate step that we knew about between Tanzania, dinosaur relatives, and what we see in South Africa. But that's changing now. And I just want to mention a few things about why we know it's changing. And that's because we've done more field work in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is right here. And this field work was led by a graduate student that I've been working with, who is now done with his PhD, someone named Christopher Griffin. And he is now a postdoc at the Yale Peabody, continuing to study these fossils. So what Chris and his team that he led with lots of Zimbabweans, he was able to target a time slice that has some of the oldest dinosaurs. And we went out there just before the pandemic hit and discovered lots and lots of evidence of some of the oldest dinosaurs in Africa. And I'm just going to show this picture very briefly. This right here is us excavating one of the oldest dinosaurs from Africa, a true dinosaur that looks very similar to what you would find in Argentina. So tune in. This discovery has not been announced publicly yet in terms of what it is or what it will be called, but it is one of the oldest dinosaurs that's ever been found, and it looks like Africa's oldest dinosaur. So there's lots and lots of work to do, and I really look forward to continuing this line of research, understanding the origin of dinosaurs and their closest relatives, and really, again, pursuing these questions for a very long time. What is a dinosaur? What made them special? And what do the closest relatives of dinosaurs tell us about the world before dinosaurs? And what do they tell us about the origin of one of the most successful groups of reptiles ever to be on our planet? Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Nesbitt. If you're ready for some questions, we have some stacked up in the chat.
Absolutely. Fire away.
Okay. So, did mammals and dinosaurs exist at the same time?
Absolutely. So the mammals that were around during the big dinosaur time, let's call it, overlapped for almost their entire history. But mammals that appeared when dinosaurs evolved and throughout most of the heyday of the big dinosaurs were quite a bit smaller. Most of them were between the size of a mouse and a rat. Some of them got to be maybe beaver size, but those were quite rare. So mammals have a history that is as long as dinosaurs. It's just mammals didn't take over the planet until the big dinosaurs went extinct at the end of the Cretaceous.
What's the best time of the year to make that trip to Tanzania to start looking for fossils?
Yeah, that's a great question. We are constrained by a number of factors for us academically when we're not teaching, but also they don't have the kind of seasons we see in North America. They have dry seasons and they have wet seasons. And we have to go at the end of the wet season, so the beginning of the dry season, because the roads would be impassable. There would be lots of rain. Just wouldn't be a great time to be out there. There are other times that you can go at the end of the dry season, but you run into fire danger while you're out there because a lot of the grass is burned naturally and by the people that live in the local area. So our summer, our May to June period in North America is a good time to go because that's the beginning of the dry season in Tanzania and Zambia and Zimbabwe.
Can you give us some idea when you're looking at a specimen? What kind of clues can tell you that this is maybe an individual variation between animals, or this might be a separate species?
That's a really good question, and it's definitely getting blurred as we get more and more fossils. But we knew going into this area what had been found in this rock layer. And essentially, every time you find a new rock layer, the animals are almost always new species. So we knew that there were no dinosaur relatives found in Tanzania or Zambia or this place in Zimbabwe. But specifically, we knew that because we had been through all of the collections that were made, those bones that were present in London and a couple other places. We knew there weren't dinosaur relatives. Once we found it, we did compare it to other dinosaur relatives across the planet, and it had a specific set of characteristics that made this animal unique. Where it gets really challenging is if you find smaller or larger forms that are similar but not exact within that same rock unit. And there we think that some of these early dinosaurs and dinosaur relatives had a lot of variability in their skeleton. And this is borne out in later dinosaurs in the Jurassic and Cretaceous, where now we were revising what we thought might have been a new species, but actually is just another growth stage of something that was known before.
You talked about the open acetabulum as a distinguishing feature. Are there other features which make something either a dinosaur or a dinosaur relative?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And the answer right now is I'm not sure. What we thought were unique dinosaur characteristics keep showing up in these dinosaur relatives. But those characteristics help us understand which dinosaur cousins are closer to dinosaurs than a little bit further away. So there are a few other characteristics, but they're not as clear as we once thought they were. But the open acetabulum or open hip socket is something that seems to have held up for a really long time as we've studied dinosaurs compared to their closest relatives, and it still works today.
So the new dinosaur you mentioned is have they come up with a name for that one?
It might have a name. I don't think we've actually decided on it, but it will be published officially in the next couple years. We're working on the publication process, and Chris is in charge of all that. So it's the process isn't as in coming up with a name isn't anything too crazy. Sometimes it's part of the local language, sometimes it's part of the local geography. A lot of times we add saurus onto the end because that's just tradition. So it will have a name sometime in the next couple of years.
So why study dinosaurs? What does the knowledge that we gain from studying dinosaurs tell us about the world, the greater world?
Yeah, there's many reasons to study dinosaurs and really any other bit of life that's been before us. And that's just I like to think of our planet as many, many different planets and understand how we got to where we are today. And dinosaurs tell us a lot about our planet, what it was like from 65 million years ago to about 230 million years ago. But there's lots and lots of reasons to study. One of those is curiosity. As humans, we're extremely curious. But we also know that many, many children go through their dinosaur phase. Maybe it's a truck phase, maybe it's a fire person phase. We all have a pretty good idea that young children get really interested in something. Again, maybe it's wider than dinosaurs. It could be prehistoric life. We know that by studying dinosaurs, we can introduce children later on to how we study our planet and understand why we study these kinds of things and things like that. It's studying dinosaurs in education really is a gateway to studying all kinds of other parts of our planet or physical processes. Being a paleontologist is amazing because you get to use any kind of science to answer your questions. It's use chemistry, use physics, use math, use art. We use all of it to reconstruct what our planet was like previously. And it also, of course, helps us understand where our planet could be going based on what's already happened in the past. So sometimes we don't study dinosaurs to understand that specifically, but the environments that dinosaurs lived in can help us understand how our planet responds to different kinds of changes like volcanics or impacts or many, many other kinds of slight or longer scale changes.
Okay, so if we could just circle back for members of the audience who might not be familiar with it, can you talk a little bit about what happened at the end of the Permian?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a whole lecture on this in about a month and a half for all my undergraduates that are starting their careers in geoscience. I always like to start off with if you had a time machine and you could pick any time on our planet to go back to, do not pick the end of the Permian. That was a very, very bad time on our planet. Number one, we know things go extinct, but number two, it took our planet somewhere between 5 and 10 million years to recover to what it was like before the end of the Permian. And what we do know absolutely is that we had really large volcanic eruptions in Siberia, in Russia. And what's amazing is that you measure the amount of material coming out of these volcanoes in cubic kilometers. Some of this rock is gone now, but a lot of that rock still exists. So we know at almost exactly the same time life takes a downward turn, you have these great changes because of volcanic activity in Siberia. Just immensely large volcanic activity. And we know that it changed the atmosphere. It pumped a lot of CO2 and other kinds of compounds into our atmosphere, and it took life a long time to recover from that.
All right, so I'm afraid I have to bring it to a close for today. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to Dr. Sterling Nesbitt for helping us discover more about our world. Please join us next week on Wednesday, September 8th at noon for the influence of juvenile dinosaurs on community structure and diversity. That's going to be presented by Ms. Kat Schroeder. She's a PhD candidate at the University of New Mexico Department of Biology. Definitely do check that one out. She's doing fascinating work. It's going to be a great presentation. You can register for next week's talk at smb.org. Each talk is free to attend and is open to the first 300 registrants. Thank you again for joining us today. Until next week, stay safe and stay curious.